It's easy to think of history as a collection of dusty dates and forgotten names, but every now and then, a story emerges that's so powerful, so tragic, so deeply human, that it refuses to be forgotten. It's a story about the end of the world. Not the end of the world, but an end of a world. The end of a dream that had lasted for more than 1,000 years. This is the story of the Fall of Constantinople. To understand it, you have to imagine a city that was less a city and more a living legend. For a millennium, it was the jewel of the world, the capital of the Roman Empire. Yes, the Roman Empire. While Rome in Italy had fallen to barbarians, its legacy lived on here, in this city protected by God and the most formidable walls ever built. They called it the Queen of Cities, the city of the world's desire. Inside its walls were more relics, more gold, more history than in all of Europe combined. Its great church, the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, was a miracle of engineering. Its dome so vast it was said to be held aloft from heaven by a golden chain. But by the year 1453, the legend was fading. The empire was a ghost, a shadow of its former self. It was no longer a vast territory, but just the city itself and a few scattered scraps of land. Its population had withered. Weeds grew in the magnificent forums where Caesars had once paraded. The emperor, Constantine the Palaeologos, was the ruler of a city of memories, a king of ghosts. He was a brave man, a good man, burdened with an impossible inheritance. And from the east, a new power was rising, young, hungry, and relentless. The Ottoman Turks. Their empire surrounded Constantinople, squeezing it like a noose. And at their head was a new sultan, a man who would change the world forever. He was only 21 years old, but he burned with an ambition that was terrifying in its intensity. His name was Mehmed, and from the moment he took the throne, he had only one thought, one obsession, one dream that consumed his every waking hour. He would be the one to conquer Constantinople. Mehmed II was no simple brute. He was a genius, a polymath who spoke 6 languages, studied philosophy, and loved poetry. But beneath the culture was a will of iron and a core of absolute ruthlessness. His own father had tried and failed to take the city. For Mehmed, it wasn't just a matter of strategy, it was a matter of destiny, a prophecy he believed was his to fulfill. He saw himself as the successor to Alexander the Great and the Caesars. But to claim that title, he needed their city. He began his preparations with chilling precision. Just north of the city, on the European side of the Bosphorus Strait, he ordered the construction of a massive fortress. The Byzantines watched in horror as it rose in a mere 4 months. They called it Rumeli Hisara. But the Turks had a more fitting name. Boğazkeser, the throat cutter. With cannons mounted on its towers, it gave Mehmed complete control of the vital waterway, cutting Constantinople off from any potential aid from the Black Sea. The noose was tightening, but Mehmed knew the city's legendary land walls, the Theodosian walls, had repelled every army for 1,000 years. They were a triple line of defense, a masterpiece of military architecture. To breach them, he needed something new, something the world had never seen before. And that's when a man named Urban arrived at his court. Urban was a Hungarian engineer, a master craftsman. But more than that, he was a mercenary of genius. He had first offered his services to the Emperor Constantine. He told him, "I can build you cannons that can blast down the walls of Babylon." But Constantine looked into his empty treasury and had to turn him away. He simply couldn't afford him. It was one of history's most tragic missed opportunities. So Urban went to Mehmed. The young sultan listened to the engineer's proposal and asked him one question. "Can you cast a cannon that will be powerful enough to smash the walls of Constantinople?" Urban replied, "I can cast a cannon of bronze with a bore of 3 spans. It will breach the walls." Mehmed's response, "I will give you whatever you ask for. You shall want for nothing." He gave Urban unlimited resources, an army of workers, and a foundry to build his monster. For 3 months the fires burned day and night. Finally, it was ready. They called it the Basilic. It was a beast of bronze, 27 feet long, so heavy it took 60 oxen and 200 men to move it. It could fire a stone ball weighing over 100 to 200 pounds for a distance of a mile. It was the largest, most powerful piece of artillery the world had ever seen, and it had one target. On April the 2nd, 1453, the people of Constantinople looked out from their ancient walls and saw a sight from their worst nightmares. The Ottoman army was arriving. It was an endless sea of men stretching to the horizon. Estimates vary, but Mehmed had brought at least 80,000 elite soldiers, and perhaps tens of thousands more irregulars and support staff. A city of God surrounded by a forest of steel, and to defend the 13 miles of walls. Constantine had less than 7,000 men, a handful of Byzantines, a few hundred Venetians, and a contingent of brave, perhaps foolish, Genoese mercenaries led by a soldier of fortune named Giovanni Giustiniani Longo. Giustiniani was a professional, an expert in siege warfare. When he arrived with his 700 men, the emperor was so overjoyed that he promised him the island of Lemnos if they were victorious. For a moment, there was hope. Giustiniani became the heart and soul of the defense. On April 6th, the bombardment began. The ground shook. The air split with a sound no one had ever heard before. The Basilic and Mehmed's other great cannons began to systematically pound the ancient stones. The noise was constant, a deafening, terrifying drumbeat of doom that went on day and night. The citizens huddled in their homes and churches praying. The defenders, led by the tireless Giustiniani, worked frantically. As soon as a section of the wall was damaged, they would rush to repair it, using barrels of earth, wood, and rubble, working under a constant hail of arrows and cannonballs. For weeks they held. It was a miracle of courage and defiance. Then came a moment that felt like divine intervention. A small flotilla of 4 ships, 3 from Genoa and 1 from the emperor himself, loaded with vital grain and soldiers, appeared on the horizon. The entire Ottoman fleet, over 100 ships, sailed to intercept them. The people of the city flocked to the sea walls to watch, their hearts in their throats. It was 4 ships against 100. In a stunning display of superior seamanship and courage, the Christian captains fought off the entire Turkish navy, ramming and burning their way through the blockade to the safety of the city's harbour, the Golden Horn. The city erupted in joy. It seemed God had not abandoned them. But Mehmed was not a man to be deterred by a single setback. He was a master of lateral thinking. The Golden Horn was protected by a massive iron chain stretched across its mouth, preventing his fleet from entering. If he couldn't get his ships past the chain, he would go around it. He ordered one of the most audacious feats in military history. His engineers built a massive wooden roadway, greased with animal fat, stretching for miles over the hills of Galata. And then, under the cover of darkness, his men began to pull his warships, dozens of them, out of the water and drag them overland into the Golden Horn. Imagine the absolute shock, the sheer horror of the Byzantine defenders when they woke up the next morning. They had gone to sleep with the Golden Horn secure. They awoke to find an Ottoman fleet sitting in their harbour, behind their defences. The psychological blow was devastating. It was the move of a genius, and it sealed the city's fate. Hope began to curdle into despair. The siege dragged on for 53 days. Food ran out. The defenders were exhausted, wounded, and hopelessly outnumbered. The constant bombardment had reduced sections of the outer wall to little more than a pile of rubble. Omens appeared in the sky, a lunar eclipse fulfilling a prophecy of the city's fall. A strange, unearthly light was seen hovering over the dome of the Hagia Sophia. Some said it was the Holy Spirit abandoning the city. Mehmed sent a final offer to Constantine: surrender the city, and he and his people would be allowed to leave unharmed, or he could become the governor of a small territory elsewhere. Constantine's reply was filled with a quiet, heartbreaking dignity. "As to surrendering the city to you," he wrote, "it is not for me to decide or for anyone else of its citizens. For all of us have reached the mutual decision to die of our own free will, without any regard for our lives." There was nothing left to do but prepare for the end. On the evening of May 28th, the final Christian service was held in the Hagia Sophia. In that moment, all the bitter divisions that had plagued the city, the rivalry between the Greeks and the Latins, the theological disputes between the Orthodox and Catholic churches, melted away. They stood together as one. The emperor in his purple robes, the Genoese mercenary, the Venetian sailor, the Greek merchant, the common man and woman. They prayed, they took communion, and they asked forgiveness of one another for any sins. They knew they were likely seeing their last sunrise. It is one of the most profoundly moving scenes in all of history. A civilization saying its own farewell. Constantine then walked the walls one last time, speaking to his soldiers, encouraging them, thanking them for their bravery. He knew he was leading them to their deaths, but he would die with them as their emperor, the last of the Romans. Across the valley in the Ottoman camp, the scene was the opposite. 1,000,000 fires lit up the night like a new constellation. The soldiers prayed, then sharpened their blades. Mehmed had promised them 3 days of unlimited plunder. Anything they could find, gold, relics, people, would be theirs. The army roared with anticipation. The final assault began in the dead of night. Before the sun rose on Tuesday, May 29th, 1453. The roar from the Ottoman lines was inhuman. A wave of sound made of war drums, trumpets, and the cries of 100,000 men shouting for blood. Mehmed sent his forces in waves. First came the Bashi bazooks, the irregulars, a poorly armed mob driven forward by whips, their only purpose to exhaust the defenders. The Christians held their ground, cutting them down by the score. For 2 hours they fought and the line held. Then came the second wave. The Anatolian Turks disciplined regular troops. The fighting became more intense, a desperate hand-to-hand struggle on the rubble of the broken walls. The great cannons fired relentlessly, their stone balls smashing into men and fortifications alike. Still, the defenders held. Giustiniani was everywhere, a lion in the fight, rallying his men, plugging gaps, his armor covered in blood and dust. Then Mehmed played his final card. He unleashed his elite troops, the Janissaries. These were the best soldiers in the world, raised from childhood to be the Sultan's personal fighting force. They advanced in perfect order, a silent, disciplined wall of death. The fighting reached a fever pitch of desperation, and then disaster. A cannonball splinter or a crossbow bolt struck Giovanni Giustiniani. It smashed through his breastplate, mortally wounding him. The heart of the defense was broken. In agony, Giustiniani asked his men to carry him away from the battle. His retreat, at the most critical moment, caused a panic. The Genoese faltered, their line wavered. At that exact moment, a group of Janissaries discovered that a small gate in the wall, a postern gate called the Cacoporta, had been left unlocked, or perhaps broken open. They poured through. Someone raised the Sultan's banner on a nearby tower. A cry went up, "The city is taken!" The defense collapsed. It was over. Emperor Constantine VI Palaiologos understood what had happened. He reportedly cast off his purple imperial regalia so he would not be captured and paraded as a trophy. With his last loyal men, he uttered his final words, "The city is fallen and I am still alive." Then he drew his sword and charged into the sea of oncoming Janissaries. He was never seen again. The last Roman emperor died as a common soldier, defending the city he loved. The 3 days of pillage that followed were a nightmare. The great city, the repository of 1,000 years of culture, was torn apart. Thousands were slaughtered. Tens of thousands more were enslaved. Priceless manuscripts were burned. Holy relics were desecrated, and magnificent works of art were melted down for their gold and silver. The crowds that had sought sanctuary in the Hagia Sophia were dragged out in chains. The great church itself was looted, its mosaics and icons defaced. Later that day, Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror rode into the city. He rode his horse directly to the Hagia Sophia. Dismounting, he walked inside into the greatest church in Christendom. He saw a Turkish soldier smashing at the marble floor and struck him down, saying, "I have given you the plunder, but the buildings are mine." He looked up at the magnificent dome, and in a gesture of humility before his God, he stooped down, took a handful of earth, and sprinkled it over his turban. Then he climbed the pulpit and declared that this sacred space would now be a mosque. The call to prayer echoed in a place that for 1,000 years had known only Christian chants. A new world had been born. The fall of Constantinople was not just the end of a city. It was an earthquake that shook the foundations of the world. It was the definitive end of the Roman Empire. It was the end of Byzantium. It sent a shockwave of fear through Europe, which now faced the unchecked power of the Ottoman Empire at its doorstep. But it also had other unforeseen consequences. Greek scholars fleeing the city with their precious manuscripts. The works of Plato, Aristotle, Herodotus flocked to Italy. Their arrival helped fuel the intellectual fire that was already burning there, supercharging the Renaissance. The loss of the old trade routes to the east spurred European explorers like Columbus to seek new ways to get to Asia, launching the Age of Discovery.